Tim Golden is unable to be here today as chair of this committee. It is loud. So I'm going to do my best to stand in for him and call this meeting of the Statewide Transportation Planning and Strategic Planning Committee to order. I should read this before I try to say it. The Strategic Transportation Strategic Planning Committee to order. So with that, I'm going to ask Matt Markham, Deputy Director of the Office of Planning, to come and make a presentation. Matt? Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Hopefully the name of the committee and my name will be the hardest part of this whole day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to come before you this afternoon to provide you with an update on the Georgia Freight Plan, which is being managed out of the Office of Planning. The Georgia Freight Plan, this is our comprehensive business case for freight investment in the state of Georgia, both serving as a policy document, a guidance for the types of freight investments that we need to make to remain competitive. And there's also the federally required component of it as well, which we do. We are required to submit to the Federal Highway every 5 years, and we do have a submission coming up. So this presentation today will be the first of a two-part series of presentations for you. I'm going to give you a little bit of the background and methodology and sort of the overview of the plan development itself. And then next month in January, prior to when we will submit our freight plan to Federal Highway, we're going to come back to you with a more detailed set of recommendations and findings and discussions, and a more robust discussion of what we plan to submit to Federal Highway and how we plan to frame the freight plan going forward. Our state freight plan was first done in 2012, and it was last updated in 2017, so we're on the cycle now for our next update. First, a little bit of background about setting this sort of stage for the business case for investment. Georgia, as we all know, the #1 state for business 9 years in a row. You can see the statistics from fiscal year 22, and all credit to the Georgia Department of Economic Development for their tireless work and effort to make sure we maintain our ranking as the #1 state and being the most competitive. One of the most interesting statistics here, though, is to look at of this investment, and these were new locations or expansions for fiscal 2022. 84% of those 17.8 billion of that investment is in what we refer to as logistics-enabled businesses. So those are businesses that rely on our state's infrastructure network, both for inputs into their business, whether it's supplies, materials, and then also outputs, moving goods to market, moving finished products to their ultimate destination. And so those key industries such as manufacturing and automotive, logistics and distribution, agribusiness, and food processing, those are key industries that rely on our networks. That those therefore are key industries that we're focusing on and understanding what those infrastructure investments that we would make would impact these key users of our network. We also are looking to make sure that our state freight plan does represent and reflect the governor's priorities as well as the priorities of the department. You can see here, these aren't all of the governor's priorities. These are just the ones where we feel like the state freight plan can make an impact. Things like expanding Georgia's role as a world-renowned hub for global commerce, leveraging technology, transportation safety, items such as that. Our freight transportation vision and mission, this was originally established in our first state freight plan in 2012, and we've kept it the same in here, so it's the same in our current freight plan. The vision of being the global gateway of choice, and a mission statement that's provided around what we call the 4 C's, improving capacity, capability, and connectivity, with the ultimate goal of giving Georgia a competitive advantage over other states when it comes to our infrastructure and benefits for freight. The methodology that we're looking at, I mean, the planning horizon that we have for our freight plan is the year 2050. So we're looking out into 2050, both for the trends and the impacts, as well as our recommendations will ultimately reflect out through 2050. It includes things such as robust private sector stakeholder in collaboration with our partners. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Reviewing and updating Georgia's state freight network. So our freight network includes both our interstates as well as critical non-interstate highways that provide freight connectivity throughout the state and between states. So we will look and see, is our freight network as it currently established the same as it needs to be? Are there new corridors or additions and things that we need to augment in order to make sure that we're still, again, reflecting what our industries are doing, where the freight is moving, and then understanding how our corridors can reflect those. Looking at things like our supply chain, the assessment of the current network, and really kind of looking to this last check is looking with a unique insight into data. We have been able to improve the access to the data we've had over the times we've done the freight plan in the past. So we have unique insights, and it's giving us better opportunity to understand at an industry-specific level what is our freight, what are those movements, where is freight going at that industry level, and so therefore, how can the decisions that we make to invest in our infrastructure, how will those impact those individual industries? So it's really, as it kind of says in that last bullet point, a business-focused impression. So, and again, this business-focused methodology is going to help us, like I said, identify the key journeys along our state, where those industries are using the infrastructure, where they're going from and to, and where we see those critical pinch points and where we can go in, and if we make strategic investments, what are those benefits going to be to those key industries? And again, those manufacturing, agriculture, distribution being the top ones that we're looking at. So as we develop our recommendations, they will be developed around the same foundational, catalytic, and innovative framework that's reflected in our statewide strategic transportation plan. Our statewide SSTP, statewide transportation plan, has laid out the vision for all of the different planning efforts that we do underneath there, and we do utilize this framework to help organize and align those, whatever those investment recommendations will be. The basic, of course, being the foundational investments. I mean, those are the things that it takes to run our business. Taking care of Georgia's existing network, making sure that the system that we have will continue to meet the expectations of our customers, of those that rely on that infrastructure. So those are improvements such as maintenance, safety, bridge operations, things such as that. And then beyond above that, catalytic investments. So those are the things that we look to grow the business. So where can we make expansion recommendations strategically in order to support economic growth and support the development of those industries in our state? That's capacity, things that are widenings, extensions of roads, commercial vehicle lanes, intermodal and multimodal strategies that would go into things that would be a catalytic investment. And then, of course, the innovation investment, that's the R&D type of investments, things such as safety technologies and implementing connected autonomous vehicle corridors and things such as that. Those innovative pieces that would give us that strong edge. I mentioned before insights into businesses and into our key stakeholders. This is a business-focused plan, so we wanted to make sure that we had business insights. So we've convened a freight advisory committee. You can see some representations on the screen of the types of industries that we have represented. We really wanted to make sure that we got a good grasp of insight from three key groups: shippers, so those who actually have the freight to move. That's people like Kia, Home Depot. The providers, those who are actually moving the freight, our partners like UPS, intermodal partners such as Norfolk Southern and CSX. And then again, our other key partners like the Georgia ports, Atlanta Regional Commission, Atlanta Airport, those key partners have all been instrumental in helping us make the business case and understand where they see impacts to their business and where they see opportunities where Georgia can make an impact on their business if we make those investments, and understand the lens that they look at the decisions they make and how our infrastructure investment decisions will impact those. And I'm going to come back to that again in a little while. So here's, now I'm going to talk just a little bit about some baseline information. In 2019, nearly 500 million tons of freight moved across Georgia's network statewide. You can see on here that's primarily on the interstates, Savannah to Atlanta, of course, being key connections along those journeys. But we do see that while the interstates are sort of the backbone of that trip, that there are critical routes outside of our interstates that are forming those journeys as well. Tonnage and sort of weight is one way to look at it. Another way to look at the freight carrier is to look at it in value, and the value of the goods that are being moved. And you can see 700 billion in goods moved in 2019. And here's where you really start to see that this is more than just an interstate story, especially when it comes to agriculture. You're seeing a significant amount of valuable freight moving throughout South Georgia, in North Georgia, even in Metro Atlanta. That is making those connections, and it helps us to understand as we look at those opportunities. We look while the interstates are definitely a critical component. There are places outside those interstates where we have valuable freight moving. We want to make sure we're understanding that. And then that image on the right is we want to make sure that while we care about the Georgia-based freight, which makes up the majority of it, we do want to understand the freight that's moving through the state that doesn't have a stopping point along the way, and those are critical primarily along our interstates. You know, I know you guys are familiar with this, that our Georgia ports are very much a great asset to our state, and they're a key reason that we are the corner store location in the Southeast for freight movement, goods moving in and out of our ports. We handle more than half of the import TEUs. That's 20-foot equivalent units, so that's a measure of containers themselves moving in and out of our ports. More than half of the imports are coming through our ports, and then almost half of the exports for the overall Southeast are moving in and out of our ports. As you look at also a measure of weight and by value, we are still a significant, important role throughout the Southeast for the movement of freight. And looking ahead to 2050, again, our time horizon that we're looking at, by any measure you look at it, weight, by tonnage, by value, we're looking for significant growth and anticipating that. Almost doubling the amount of tonnage to 900 million, and then more than doubling the value of that, of those goods to 1.6 trillion, I think, in value. Again, trucks would be carrying the vast majority of that moves by trucks. We do have a significant amount also moving by rail. Not as much through air, but in value, high value goods do tend to move through air. So there is a portion of that would move in air cargo as well. So these are at its highest level, the growth factors that we're facing that we understand we need to make sure that we're addressing. Returning back a little bit to insights we've gained from our stakeholder advisory committee. As we said, we wanted to make sure this was business focused. So we asked our industry, what is important to you? What are your key performance indicators? What are the most important measures that you're evaluating? And then how do we then go in and review the investment recommendations we might make through the lens of how it would impact these key performance indicators for you? And so in those key industries, looking at safety, reliability, cost, speed, and risk, and then we would be able to evaluate. So as we come back and look at potential packages of investments, we want to see how will those investments ultimately move the needle or impact those decisions that businesses are making. And again, it's about those decisions, but also about where are the goods moving, what are the key corridors, and you can see for manufacturing and agriculture. Again, this goes back to tell the story that while there's a significant amount of focus on the interstates, there's also very important need to make sure that our rural networks are able to support that anticipated movement and growth, especially in areas in South Georgia and North Georgia, and again, even in Metro Atlanta. So we can pull together these sorts of insights to help understand the investments we would make based on those industry bottom line and the actual journeys that the businesses would be making. So that's again, just a brief overview of the background and methodology and the approach that we are taking. We are, furiously working to finish up our final recommendations and investment package options that, again, I said will be presented back to you in January, and that foundational catalytic and innovative framework. We do have one more Freight Advisory Committee meeting. The meeting's actually going to be next week, where we're going to talk through some of our findings in more detail and make sure that we get understandings from them that we're able to check to see if the direction we are going reflects the direction that we've gotten from them throughout the entire course of this plan. And then we have to complete our items that are due to Federal Highway. They have a specific checklist of things, some of which are reflected on here. We're definitely going more in depth and doing a more robust effort than is required under the federal plan. So we'll make sure that we meet those federal requirements in order to submit our plan. But what we're looking at is well above and beyond what is just required by the federal government. So anyway, that's where we are now. I'll be happy to take any questions. And again, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you, Matt. Does anyone have any questions? None? Oh, Commissioner?
No questions. I just want to commend Matt and the planning team. That Freight Advisory Committee has been amazing. And to see all those business leaders at the table, and they've just been robust meetings, right? I mean, it's been full. And to engage and to really listen to what business is saying, what's important to them, and that slide he had of the rank order of what's really important to them is really helping planning be able to, drill down and understand that, such that as we advance projects, ultimately, that we're making those strategic business decisions. And quite honestly, I think this plan is being business focused and really looking at what drives Georgia's economy from manufacturing and agribusiness and food processing, and looking at each of the commodity types and where they flow and origin and destination really is really great data. And it will really help us be key in strategic decision making. And I'll say that the technology, since we've done this from the first one to now having the data of being able to determine where things are going and freight flows back and forth and by commodity type, is a lot better than we had back then. So this is a much more robust freight plan than we started with. And I remind the board that back when we had the first, I guess it was the federal, we had a freight plan before it was federally required, and then it was updated 2018, I think you said. 2017. And when we did that update, Georgia was recognized along with Texas for having the two best freight plans in the nation. So, and we didn't want to share that honor with Texas. I'm still upset about that, but I've got over it. But again, it just shows you that how far we've come in the criticality, as I said at the biennial the other day, the criticality of the freight network drives this economy. And so this work is going to inform us going forward. So I'm super excited about it. If those maps you saw, you can spend a long time looking at those maps and just understanding that, and really great stuff. And the final plan will have all that data in it. It will be a very good tool to be used. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Anyone else? With nothing else, this committee stands adjourned. Thank you, Matt.
At this time, I call the Legislative Committee to order, and I would like to ask Josh Waller to come forward, our Director of Public and Policy and Government Affairs, to give us an update about the legislative process. Josh?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee, full board, and commissioner. It's December. One of the things that we do in December as we're looking towards the legislative session is we will present before you all today what we're proposing for the legislative agenda. Those items that we're going to work with members of the General Assembly to get adopted to update the statute as it relates to transportation. So the first item of note is a P3 statute alignment update, and just as a reminder, we're GDOT in our Title 32 statute. We've probably had one of the older P3 statutes in the state, and over the last several years, before other agencies were really in the game, GDOT had a defined statute, some starts and stops, some changes, and so over the last few years, we're very thankful General Assembly's worked with us in terms of alternative contracting methods and adopting those things to give us more tools in the toolkit to get these projects financed and delivered. But we still have a few more changes, a couple of updates dealing with things that had been probably should have been adjusted years ago, dealing with aligning when we have to hold public meetings to make it consistent with our other projects, as well as the final approval processes, again, to kind of bring in some consistency with the existing program. So again, just some hopefully, I'll say final updates, and then we'll be back here next year saying we found a few more things. But that's part of the process. You're always trying to perfect law as you're going out there, letting these projects, getting a better understanding of what statute, how the statute needs to be structured, and obviously work with our members of the General Assembly to do that. The next item is one we brought before, but has been continuing the perfecting process, and that's dealing with routine maintenance contract services. And that's where we're at, where those services today that we're outsourcing, they're comprehensive in nature, they're routine maintenance, comprehensive contracts. And one of the things we'd like to do is get the statute, make it clear that we could secure those through best value. And that's best value is where you also not just have the price component, but you add that kind of quality technical score to it. We have that in the design build world today, where you have design build best value. Just want to bring that to the routine maintenance, comprehensive routine maintenance services contracts. And the last is the quick response projects, which I know you're probably familiar with out of our field districts, which are those turn lanes, right turn lane, left turn lane. And just the reality with inflation today is that cap in statute's $200,000, and unfortunately, as costs have gone up, it's proven more difficult to achieve those quick response projects. And by way of background with that, it follows a different procurement process, more streamlined, where we go out, get 3 quotes, 3 bids, evaluate those, and then award off the lowest bid of those. And so this would, working with our partners in General Assembly, work to update that and increase it to a level that would ensure that we can capture those type projects and continue to move the needle with those, those operational improvements that really make a difference in the community when we go in there and get it done. And they, as opposed to sometimes some of our larger capacity projects or other large projects that take a little bit more time to deliver. Those are 3 bullets, and usually we have a process this committee will usually entertain a motion to present to the full board. And
all right, you've heard the 3 proposals here for the legislative update items that may go to or will be going to the General Assembly. Before I entertain a motion to move these, any questions? Okay, Jeff, please.
Yeah, on the quick response legislation, and I know that's, I've utilized that a number of times in the area that I represent. It's real good and real handy. Maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but is there a dollar amount of the increase, what it was settled at? And secondly, because of inflation being such a factor, will that be indexed at all?
I know that we've talked about indexing it, but in terms of the cost, we're still looking at different quotes. And part of what we want to do is work with the legislative sponsor, but you could be looking at going potentially to 400 or somewhere maybe north of that or south of that, but in that range. We're really trying to look at those project types, so those left turn lanes, right turn lanes, those things that historically the quick response project have been quick response projects. Make sure we align that cap so that we're still able to do that. It's really just kind of keeping the program whole, keeping it as it functions today. And so to the point though, as we finalize, as we always do, as we finalize the legislation, we'll bring that back to you after we work with the legislative sponsor. Thank you.
Commissioner, any other comments or questions that you might want to address right now? Jamie?
What was the number set?
10 years ago. Thank you.
Anyone else? We do have a quorum of our committee members, so at this time I will entertain a motion from a committee member. I have Johnny, I have Jerry.
Motion, how do you want the motion worded? Motion to,
To approve the 3 requests that Josh has just presented to us. All right, do I have a second from a committee member? Johnny? All right, Johnny has seconded it. All right, all those in favor from the committee members, please say aye. Aye. Motion passed, and we will forward this on to the full board tomorrow. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
So the next item, I wanted to follow back up. Last month, I had given a summary of where the Joint Study Committee on Electrification of Transportation stood. They were approaching it was before their final meeting, and the deadline for the committee. And they had their meeting last week. They adopted a final report and they had about 38 recommendations compiled. They didn't adopt all 38. And the final report's not yet ready. They've approved it, but it's still because it was a very dynamic, there are still a lot of moving parts. The final report should be available sometime, hopefully by the end of this week, and as committed last month, we'll share that with the full board. I did just want to highlight, though, just kind of where we talked in sort of like 5 bullets the last meeting. So they did, and kind of just overview, and I will give you a more detailed, as this EV discussion is going to continue, we'll go in more depth, but of the 5 kind of bulleted areas, the one dealing with the sale by the kilowatt hour, which we're not allowed to do today. Convenience stores, retailers can't sell by the kilowatt hour if they don't produce electricity. They adopted recommendations saying to update the law. They adopted recommendations supporting this department and our pilot project on MBUF on mileage-based user fees that we're undertaking. They've supported that. They also expressed an interest in potentially funding more study of it, so we'll work with them in that process. They also were very firm and resolved that whatever we do in the transportation space, we have got to preserve that user fee structure, that use of the infrastructure. Those who use it need to pay for it. They were very strong in embracing those recommendations. They decided not to wade into with the recommendation on the issue of the marketplace, i.e., what is the relationship between the power company and the retailer. They decided not to adopt any recommendations on that, and they ultimately decided not to adopt any recommendations, no change to the status quo when it comes to the direct sale of vehicles. So we'll follow, once that final report's available, and it'll show them item by item, but that's sort of the broad strokes as an update from their last meeting. Next, federal update. And December, feds, 'tis the season of candy canes and continuing resolutions. So it's December. We're still under a continuing resolution, which expires on December the 16th. And by just, again, the continuing resolution is basically taking the last year's Appropriations Act, striking through that September 30th date and putting another date on it. So a reminder, there's kind of 2 big drawbacks, particularly in the transportation space, when you're operating under continuing resolution. The first is the IIJA for each fiscal year has a 2% increase due to inflation. When we're operating under a continuing resolution, that 2% increase across those various formula funds, you're pegged to the prior fiscal year. So we would have access to that inflation increase. Additionally, we only get a pro rata, so you take the total amount that GDOT would get in the fiscal year, divide by 365, multiply it by the number of days in the CR. That's the money that's available for us to authorize. So again, the challenges associated with that, when we look at it kind of planning out the lettings. Of course, we've been here, got this T-shirt. We got a lot of these T-shirts, so we will continue to power through. But just that's the update, December the 16th. There had been talk about a December 23rd extension because you've got some retiring senior appropriators who are really eager. They wanted to get an omnibus, a full funding bill across the finish line as they are set to retire before January the 3rd. The optimism for that is starting to go down, and the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell suggested the best approach might be a continuing resolution into January. So we'll see. but wanted to give you a state of play on that. So it could be a December 23rd, or it could be something that'll take place in the next, continuing resolution to go to the next Congress.
Any questions? Yes, Jeff?
I know we've been distracted here in Georgia the last few weeks with an election and everything, but do you, and I haven't heard this in the last 48 hours, but you have any information regarding a potential rail workers strike and where that may stand?
So the Congress adopted so the way that the national labor law is structured with respect to rail workers, Congress can adopt a resolution to basically prevent the strike, which they have done. They've also adopted legislation. I'm not as certain. I'll follow up on the legislation dealing with the railroad retiree benefits, but they also tried to adopt legislation and advance it to address some of those sick leave issues. But that was one of the things that it's a tool in the toolkit for Congress under our national labor laws, and they chose to do it. And the president has signed that into law, basically avoiding this, basically putting a halt to the strike.
Is that a temporary halt, or is it going to be?
I'll be honest, I'd need to follow up on the length of that, how long that, I didn't see what the length, how long that length, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Any other comments or questions? All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Josh, for a good report once again.
Thank you.
Our next meeting will begin at 2:45 with the Committee of the Whole. The Committee of the Whole will now come to order, please. I would like to ask our Deputy Chief Engineer to come forward, Andrew Heath, and give us an update in regards to Transit Trust Fund.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Commissioner. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you here this afternoon. Madam Chair, if it's okay, I have two different presentations for this committee, so I will go through one and then pause for questions before going into the second.
That would be fine.
Thank you very much. So to kick it off with the first presentation regarding the Transit Trust Fund and a proposed formula program that the department will be moving forward with as we enter into the next calendar year. To set the stage, this is a very dense presentation with a lot of important information in it. So up front, I want to give you guys some sort of key facts or key takeaways that I'd like for you to really hone in on as we work through this presentation. First and foremost, this formula program that I'll be discussing is brand new. It has not existed before now, and we will be looking to execute and introduce this new program as we move into calendar year 23. The program is specifically designed to provide funding for transit operators across the state of Georgia, and it will allocate funding via formula. So think the LMIG program as I talk about the formula allocation, and it will require an application from transit providers for eligible uses to leverage that funding for them to utilize. The program will be formally announced to transit providers in January out of our Division of Intermodal, who will be leading this effort, and we will be following up this presentation with posted guidance to transit providers as to how this is exactly going to work and be rolled out. And it is designed to reoccur annually. So this is something that we're looking to do on an annual basis beginning in calendar year 23. So just some background on the state of transit within Georgia. You can see we have robust coverage of transit providers across the state. 129 of Georgia's 159 counties have transit service, whether urban or rural in nature. And one of the key responsibilities and duties of our intermodal division on the transit side is to administer FTA grants for, you can see 82 plus 9 transit providers in allocating federal dollars for them to do capital improvements and to operate their systems. So you can see we provide robust support for transit providers across the state. Now, how does the Transit Trust Fund come into play? So some background on what the Transit Trust Fund is. It was established through HB 511 in the 2021 legislative session and can now be found in the code as Section 4813-141. And I've got some specific language in here taken directly from code that I'll read to you, saying there shall be established a Georgia Transit Trust Fund as a separate fund in the state treasury. The Commissioner of Transportation shall be the trustee of that fund. Money appropriated to the Georgia Transit Trust Fund shall be dedicated for use by one or more transit providers on transit projects. So these are dollars specifically dedicated towards transit projects across the state. And it's funded through what we call rideshare fees. And you can see the 50-cent excise tax levied for on-hire ground transport trips. So think of your Ubers or Lyfts or things of that nature. And 25 cents for shared for-hire ground transport trips. And that was created through HB 105 in the 2020 session. So that is the funding that we're talking about when we talk about the Transit Trust Fund. And we expect that the Transit Trust Fund dollars would be reflected in annual appropriations, right? So as we work through the budget process, we would expect those trust fund dollars to be reflected for the department to then go utilize and distribute appropriately. So now talking about this new Transit Trust Fund program, how will this work and what is this going to look like? So kind of starting from the top and starting from the Transit Trust Fund itself, again, we expect those dollars to be reflected in annual appropriations. Upon that appropriation, GDOT will do certain activities, and we'll sort of bucket those monies into certain activities. The first being retaining matching funds for various FTA programs. As I just talked about, we support transit operators across the state, and we do so through matching dollars for some capital programs or capital projects for these transit providers. So one of the things that we want to continue to do is maintain that program or maintain that service, so to speak, that we do, working with the providers through these existing FTA contracts that we administer. So we're going to continue to do that through the Transit Trust Fund. We are also going to continue to coordinate directly with transit providers like the ATL regarding directed appropriations or line item appropriations so that we can fund those projects as directed by the legislature. We have done that previously, and we expect to continue to do that to fund transit priorities within the ATL region. But then finally, what we anticipate or what we will be doing moving forward is creating this new program, the Transit Trust Fund Formula Program, to distribute and allocate funding to counties with existing transit service using a population-based formula. This is outside of the ATL region, and we're looking to mimic the existing LMIG application process. And I'll get into what that formula process will look like with some details behind that. So here's how we anticipate the formula to be rolled out. The Transit Trust Fund balance, as I just talked through, will be allocated using 2020 census data to calculate allocations by county. And you can see the breakdown in this table here on this slide. 55% of the dollars in the Transit Trust Fund that are going through the formula program will be allocated based upon population. So that percentage will then direct the subsequent percentage of the Transit Trust Fund formula dollars that are available. 25% will then be distributed again by population, but for those counties that have grouped together to form a regional transit service. So a multi-county service, a multi-county agency that have pooled their resources together, are working together to expand the reach of their transit operation within their region. 25% of that distributed by population for those entities. And then finally, 20% will be equally distributed for counties with a median household income below $45,000. So directly targeting the most disadvantaged counties in the state and the transit operators that are operating within those counties, looking to get them some additional dollars to help support those agencies directly. So from an eligibility perspective, as we allocate these dollars to these providers, what we are proposing is that the Transit Trust Fund program mirror the requirements of the Federal Transit Administration with eligible uses as detailed below. So anything from rolling stock to rehab or renovation of stations to electrification, engineering and design activities, other capital items, and additional operating expenses incurred through additional FTA dollars that were realized through the IIJA. So for new operating expenses, not existing operating expenses that they are currently incurring. So some considerations as we roll this out, and again, additional detail will be pushed out beginning in January. This is an application-based process. This is not direct distribution, so GDOT will not automatically distribute dollars to all transit providers. We will be looking for information from the providers themselves as to how they would utilize those dollars, and we'll be working with them to ensure those are eligible expenses, and then we will distribute the dollars appropriately, monitor their use, and make sure that they're doing so appropriately, again, through the intermodal division. Obviously, as we look to do this annually, the amount of rideshare fees appropriated will impact the funds available for distribution. So if it's a higher appropriation amount within the budget, that is going to provide us additional dollars to distribute through this formula. If it's lower, that will be a lower amount of money that's available for distribution via this formula. However, the trust fund balance that we are currently looking at, GDOT believes is viable to begin this program in the next calendar year for allocation. So the timeline here as we propose to roll this out. So again, beginning in January, we will be finalizing the allocations through the Transit Trust Fund Formula Program for transit providers, and we will announce availability of the formula funds and begin to accept applications from transit providers. So we expect to initiate this program in earnest as we enter the new year. Through February and March, we will be initiating contracts with those providers for those eligible uses to distribute the funds to those transit agencies directly, with execution expected of those contracts expected within April. And then from May to December, we'll be managing those contracts, working with the transit providers to ensure those activities are being carried out. And then if there are any unspent funds as a result of delivering those projects, they would be returned to the Transit Trust Fund to then work forward to the next calendar year. As we complete this in 2023, we would then look to, again, reinitiate in January of 2024, understanding the current state of the Transit Trust Fund and the dollars available. So that was a lot of information, so I'm going to pause here for questions.
That is a lot of information, but a lot of good information. I think it would probably be, Andrew, if we possibly could, a good idea if you could give us the proposed rollout, particularly that page. They may want others, but I think that would be a good thing for us to have for communication factors. It is a lot to digest, and I think everyone on this board is quite interested in the transit, particularly in our communities, rural or urban. So if any other questions or comments from the board members? Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things to elaborate on. One is we'll definitely share this presentation to you via either electronic or hard copy at your pleasure to digest. I want to go back to reemphasize this only applies to the non-ATL boundary, the Atlanta Transit Link Authority, 13 county region. Make sure I get that right. I'm looking at Scott. Is that good? Yeah. lot of boards to keep up with. And those allocation of funds would be what's not used there. So again, most of these fees are generated in Metro Atlanta, so therefore most of the investment and the big investment is made here in Metro Atlanta through the ATL. This would be the remainder funding that would go formula distribution, again, as Andrew has put out there. And we try to build on the success of LMIG. That's been such a successful program, and I think you all would agree that your cities and counties love that consistency of that program. And the same thing as Andrew said, this is not a direct appropriation automatically. They've got to demonstrate the need, and that was the other thing I want to go back and made my note on. This does not supplant or will not supplant existing local funding. This is to be additive on top. With the one carve-out is over the IIJA that Josh just mentioned that increases on a percentage basis every year, it would help local governments to improve their local match because they're going to have to put more local money in to match the higher federal, to draw down the higher federal dollars. So that is the one exception that, again, is a little bit different. But again, that's additional. They provide additional service with that additional transit, those additional FTA dollars. So we try to, again, try to make this for our transit providers, all the transit providers, a process that is easy instead of every year doing an open call for projects and trying to go through, various selections and choice determinations of, how do you distribute the rideshare funds to these local providers. This does not preclude, again, legislative intent from our General Assembly or the Governor's Office, just like the first major appropriation was over to MARTA, the Bankhead, where the Microsoft station's going in, which was obviously a huge economic driver. That was, again, in the appropriations bill where the use is, and same as for Athens Clarke County, if you remember back in the first year of the bill that came, or the first year of the funding that came through. So this still doesn't limit legislative intent of how to use dollars. Again, as Andrew showed, it sets up the trustee to determine how dollars are spent. Again, work very closely with the ATL because they have a similar process to this board of creating priority investment list, which is, again, robust needs, and that's where the first dollars go. And then we work through the rest of the state, who has tremendous needs as well. And as he showed you, those 9 small urban providers, don't put the word small in there. That's a term of art from FTA, but you got, Chatham Area Transit, and you got Macon-Bibb, and you got Augusta, Richmond, and Columbus. You've got some pretty significant transit providers there as well that previously hadn't had access to be able to receive these type of funds. So I think this will be well received, and again, give them opportunities to do even more transit across all of these counties that are served by the non-ATL area. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, it is exciting, and we'll look forward to getting this information. If you'll continue now.
Thank you, Commissioner Marks. So now, switching gears to the second presentation here. Again, this will be a new program here. Again, a very dense presentation with a lot of information, so I'll try to walk through it slowly here. But proposed freight rail program, some key facts behind this. Once more, this is a brand new program, and this program has 3 sub-programs included within it. It is subject, similarly, to annual appropriations for the dollars that will be utilized in this program. It is administered at the discretion of the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, and it's designed to enhance state investment in freight rail for public benefit across the state. The program will be formally announced to rail operators in early spring of next year, with posted guidance and application documents that will be provided. Again, this will be administered out of our Division of Intermodal as we move into 2023. So some background on this program, what it is, where it came from. So this is a legislative activity in the 2020 session, which is now in code as 32241.3. And I'll read this here for you. The Georgia Freight Railroad Program was established in order to enhance the state's investment in freight rail projects for the public benefit and to support a safe and balanced transportation system for the state. The Georgia Freight Railroad Program shall be administered subject to appropriations at the discretion of the Commissioner in order to enhance the state's investment in freight rail projects for public benefit and to support a safe and balanced transportation system for the state. So that is the action that the department is moving forward in carrying out and administering, again, with those appropriations being realized. So the railroad program is composed of 3 sub-programs, and these sub-programs are in statute as well. The first being the Rail Enhancement Program, and you can see the eligible uses that are anticipated in that enhancement program: acquire, lease, or improve railways or railroad equipment, including rail crossings, rolling stock rights-of-way, or rail facilities. The second sub-program is called the Rail Preservation Program. The difference in this second program is you can see that the short line railways are specifically called out in this program. And for definition, short line railways in statute are defined as Class 3 railroads. That's how it's defined within this program. And then finally, the Rail Industrial Access Program: build, construct, restructure, or improve industrial access to railroad tracks and related facilities. So again, this is specifically listed in statute and guides the eligible activities for these sub-programs. So how will this work? Once more. So starting from the very beginning, this is obviously subject to appropriations. So initiating these programs we will need to see those appropriations reflected within the budget. Guidance, as I mentioned, will be developed through GDOT and governed by GDOT policy. That policy is being drafted as we speak, and we look to finalize that policy at the beginning of the new year, with that guidance then going out to rail operators in early spring. This will be a solicitation-based program. So we talked about on the transit side how we won't do a call for projects. This will be a little different. We will be soliciting projects from eligible applicants for each of these 3 sub-programs. And again, I'm noting there that the Rail Preservation Program specifies short lines within statute. The solicitation will be an application-based process with that application where that will be developed. And we will be creating an internal, what we're calling a Rail Program Evaluation Committee, or RPEC. And that RPEC will review applications as directed by the Commissioner for the determination of public benefit to satisfy the legislative intent, and then distribute the funds for those projects accordingly. So from an application evaluation perspective, and when we're looking to satisfy the criteria of public benefit, you can see the criteria to be considered. And many of these are listed directly in statute. So we have not necessarily come up with these on our own, but reflected what statute has directed us to look at. But then we've added some things as well to determine, again, public benefit as we look to administer these dollars. So that could include public safety, enhanced mobility of goods, trade and economic development, or reduction of expenditures due to improved efficiency on the business side of things. So this is what the RPEC will be considering as applications are provided for the distribution of these funds. So the rollout of this program, again, will begin in earnest for potential amended 23 or 24 funding, i.e. this upcoming legislative session, and appropriations being directed through that session. Again, it is designed as an annual recurring process so that as we work through the budget cycle and we understand what those appropriations are, we can annually work through this solicitation-based process. Once more, guidance and an application will be communicated to rail operators in early spring. And one last thing, we will have to develop an annual report as to how these dollars are being utilized to satisfy statute on that. And that will need to be distributed at the end of each fiscal year in terms of what projects were funded, how did we satisfy public benefit, those types of things. So we'll certainly have to work through that annual reporting of how we're carrying out this program. So with that ends my presentation for this program. Happy to answer questions.
Any questions regarding our freight railroad program update? Yes, please, Jerry.
So, one of your bullet points is the rail industrial access program. Would these be new accesses, like, let's say an industrial prospect is half a mile or a mile away from the existing rail? This is a new tangent that goes between the rail and the industrial prospect?
It could be. So we could look at things like a siding to a new industrial site, or a spur of some sort to an industrial site. It could be, again, looking at public benefit. How are we improving the efficiency of existing businesses by improving that rail flow, right? So I think there are multiple ways to look at that, but what we would look for is how are you determining that public benefit? How are we evaluating it? And does it then satisfy those criteria to distribute those funds?
Is there a monetary maximum that the program allows?
We have not established that at this time.
And then last, would the applicant be the railroad itself, or would it be the industrial prospect, the private sector prospect?
That has not yet been determined. My expectation is we would probably look for the rail operator as an applicant, but again, that has not been finalized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or statements? Once again, a lot to digest. Commissioner?
Yeah, I want to thank Andrew for doing the heavy lifting today on deep subjects on a December afternoon. So, again, this is implementing the code section that has been in play, and of course, as he mentioned several times, all subject to appropriations. So we'll work forward to that. But let me give you probably the cleanest example of where this is, and this has to be done carefully again, where you're using public dollars on private rail lines, private for-profit rail lines, let me add. So that's why we've got to have a really tough test of making sure that public benefit is being defined. But a great example of that is with blocked railroad crossings, and you probably all have those that happen in your district where the train stops and blocks the crossings. We did an analysis probably about 5 years ago if we were to add one bridge over the railroad of CSX or Norfolk Southern or Class I railroads in every city in Georgia, just adding one crossing. It was over, back then, this is 5 years ago, so it was over $4 billion. And so that's very expensive to add bridges and overpasses. But potentially you could use these dollars to work with the railroad to put a siding in so that the train doesn't have to stop in town, that they have a place outside of town that they can pull off out of the way and stop their train, would be much cheaper than building bridges and overpasses. So things like that, just to sort of think about. Jerry had a great point of, what rail industrial access could be, but other things could be very much things like that. And believe me, NS and CSX don't like stopping in towns because their phone rings just as well as yours does. And you should guide your phones to Norfolk Southern or CSX if they're blocked, but because they control that, we don't. But they have several hot spots, and that's what I would anticipate you'd see in the first applications of trying to build sidings so they can get the trains out of town and not blocking up crossings. So things like that, but it's got to be we have to demonstrate there's a public benefit to use public funds on these rail lines. So still a lot of work to do. We look forward to working with you all, gaining insights and input, and certainly we'll have a lot of discussion once we get into applications and get to that point as well, to get your input, insight in those applications.
I have a question.
Yes, please, Jeff.
And it's based on what the commissioner mentioned in your example with the bridges and the areas to pull off out of town. The legislation that's already there or is being proposed would not prevent local governments or local development authorities from raising money for such purposes of the example you gave. Would it, or are we far enough down the road to know if local monies can come into play to accommodate examples like you mentioned, or does it have to come from this side?
That's another fine question. I don't know the answer to local procurement issues or local use restrictions of local dollars on use, and that may be subject to each municipality as a city or a county. Something to look into, but I'm sure the railroads would be willing to accept anything so to help defray the capital costs. So it's a good question, because that could be, to your point, it could be a very good partnership process too, right, in a local community. Because as we talk about funding on always, and as Matt Markham was talking about earlier, is we all have to chip in, right? It's all, you may need everybody at the table to make something happen. So it's a good point to see if what local governments could do to help as well.
Yes, Jenny.
I was wondering for the trains, and when they stop and they changing cars or whatever they might be doing, and it's for a lengthy time and they affect businesses, is that something we need to discuss with the Norfolk Southern or CSX or whoever, not with our group, I'm assuming?
Yes, that's correct. We don't control any of that, and that they're on their rights of way, the railroad. So that is their issue to work with, and we try to direct the cities and counties to them. It's good for us to know, but again, it's up to them and the railroad.
Okay.
We certainly understand about the crossings being held up for us on the roadways going around the port area. So this is a very good and positive thing, I think, that we are approaching here.
We just to share too, we've tried to be proactive, because this is an issue, and you saw Matt Markham's presentation, and increased freight, and there's going to be some continued rail growth as well. trains will continue to be longer. We just heard at the biennial, GPA is building 10,000 foot long trains. That's 2+ miles, or right at 2 miles. This is going to continue to be an issue, but we try to be proactive. We've got 2 locations now with signs that when the trains are blocking the crossings, that you get a sign on the side of the road in advance of that to tell you that the train is blocking the crossing so that you can detour to another route instead of driving all the way and getting stopped and backing up. And so we've got 2 locations there. The technology is fairly new. We're proving out this technology, but we're trying to, again, provide drivers with information in advance when these instances do happen, and I suspect that we'll continue to do more of those kind of projects in the future as well.
I'm assuming, if they are blocking and what you're saying, the signs that could go up, say, at a certain time of day, this intersection would be blocked, is that?
It's actually based on the presence of the train itself.
Okay.
So if there's a train there, that those signs will light up saying this crossing is blocked, you can take this alternate route.
I know there's an intersection at home where the turn lanes get backed up so far because they can't turn in because the train's there. And I didn't know if there's any way to coordinate that with us, and I'm asking, I don't know, but that is an issue.
It's certainly something we can look at for sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Any other comments or helpful hints? Seeing none, thank you, Andrew,
Thank you.
for great reports, and we look forward to getting the information.
Thank you.
If there's no further business for this committee of the whole, it stands adjourned.